Hi, Norm. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so
Yeah, thanks for
thankful.
having me. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and you're right in in the same area, like in the Toronto area.
hmm
And I know you've been researching mindfulness now for a couple of decades. Is that right?
yeah, getting there. I think my initial motivation was like just to get into a funded fMRI study to learn fMRI tech, like brain imaging when I was a grad
Right.
student, and I was like the guy in the lab who already did yoga. So they're like, you seem like a good fit, and the rest is sort of history. It became my thesis, and eventually I started developing my own practice to see what all the fuss was about from the
Yeah.
inside out instead of just taking brain scans of other people practicing. And now it's become a big part of my life and my profession and everything really. Yeah.
So maybe before we get into the research, because I know we really want to talk about what's happening at your lab. It's called Rad Lab. It's
Yeah, Rad Lab, just tried to find something juicy and build a brand. But yeah, Rad for regulatory and affective dynamics. So how people's emotion, like affect being like emotion, how people's emotions are
Mm.
expressed, and then also how they try to shape those emotions to be a bit happier, suffer a little less, that kind of thing.
Okay. So
Mhm.
I know people kind of have a general sense of what is meditation and maybe probably even mindfulness as well, but maybe you could just take us through a little bit of that background. What's happening in a mindfulness practice and why do you think why is it working? How is it affecting the brain? And then we can.
Yeah, like I don't think there's just like one story that's right. There's probably a lot of different stories and a lot of different practices, and it really depends on what situation you put people in when you scan their brains. Will determine a lot what happens. But I can give you like one story that I'm comfortable telling. So, mindfulness is fundamentally the process of trying to reflect on your own experience. So, getting to know what it's like to be yourself in the world, and to use your attention and an intention to hold attention to what's happening right here in the present moment to reveal what your own kind of programming is in a way. And then once that programming is revealed, you can make some choices, right? And before that, it's just sort of like running below the surface, and you don't know why you get mad sometimes, or why you feel the way you do sometimes, or why you did that thing. I mean, you can come up with exclamations after the fact, but the reality is for most people we've sort of acquired habits and ways of seeing the world, and those become so deeply entrenched that they become largely invisible to us. So mindfulness is the idea of like, noticing, I have this moment of liking something, disliking something, and then that sets off a cascade of ways of responding to that feeling.
Mhm.
And for each person that's going to be different, right? And even over the course of your life that might change. So the practice is about bringing that stuff into awareness, because awareness is where the part of us that's conscious can make a difference, right? um, so it's not so much about getting to one particular state, but having some choice in whether the way you're already wired is working for you or not.
So, I know in my psychology days, we talked about people have certain like beliefs, I guess, that then, trigger emotions. So just these, you said the wiring that we have this, that we're trying to get a more better sense when we do mindfulness. Is this different in people? Like, is there a core like set of like if someone who's not done mindfulness would have a sense of similar types of beliefs like we have all of us are like that?
Well, I think
Or
we
is it?
inherit a lot of our beliefs culturally, right? And so, and obviously from our parents and family and the people we grew up with are setting prototypes for what it means to be a person. And here's how you react in the situation. Here's where you should do something. Here's where you shouldn't. And of course, in any culture, there's going to be a lot of commonalities, and with that comes um, I guess challenges that I wouldn't say are universal, but are really common. So like in the West, we're taught to rationalize things, like to praise reason over intuition. And an example I always give is, like you're in elementary school, you're starting to do like a book report. I assume kids still do book reports these days, so who knows? And you're not praised for just describing like the transition between different emotions you felt. Like, on page 6, I felt like an unsettled feeling in my stomach. And then on page 12, like when this happened, I noticed my temple was throbbing slightly. Like, no, that's not seen as valuable. Instead, you're supposed to like break down, okay, here's the character and here's the conflict, and but applying some kind of analysis to it. And the author did a good job of expressing this, and here's my evidence. So it's all very like reason is where you're trying to get to, and you're trying to escape from just being kind of at the mercy of your emotions or your visceral reactions. So what we see in the people we study who are mostly coming from fairly privileged, like educated, industrialized, like North American cohort, that tends to get baked in so deeply that when we get exposed to a stressor, our immediate response is to try to tamp down the emotional qualities of the stressor and to intellectualize or rationalize it in some way, like the fact that we're feeling bad or unsettled or uncertain is a problem that we have to fix. So we try to move away from feelings of uncertainty and feeling a lot of different, not well characterized things that change all the time, and to enforce a kind of stability where we label things and then link them to then the appropriate actions that are supposed to be taken. So I don't know if that's like the same thing as having like, I believe that, God exists, or I believe that like we're the only intelligent species out there, like that kind of belief, but like that framework that like what we're up to as adults is finding ways to control our emotions and to get away from being too directly in contact with our emotions, but more to be kind of like in the driver's seat and be sort of in a top-down way controlling them, I think is really
What
common to
other
see.
option is there? I mean, is that not the best way to address something, is to intellectualize it and understand why you're feeling a certain way? Like put
Yeah,
a
it's
reason?
a great point. And I don't mean to say that that's wrong. Like there's a reason why we're trained to do that. In a lot of situations that works quite well for us. It works particularly well when we have the capacity, the agency, the power to solve our own problems. So someone says something I don't like, and instead of just like wallowing in self-pity or something like that, I might figure like, well, maybe they said that for different reasons. Maybe it's not really about me. Maybe their opinion doesn't really define who I am, and I can kind of think my way out of the problem. But there's other situations where like something happened in the past, right? You're like, oh, I wish my dad had said like I love you more, and he just never said it to me, right? And people have these kind of resentments about things that really they have no power to address at this point, right? Like the only thing that they could change would be potentially their own expectations for how the past should have gone.
Mhm.
And I think for those kind of problems, which I would consider like ill-formed problems, like you're presenting it like it's a problem to be solved, but it's something in the past, or it's something about like the way the world is, or it's something where it's just like so far beyond what you can handle. Getting into this position where like you resent and reject like a fact of the world, but you actually have no power to solve it, it gets you stuck in this position where you're trying to avoid feeling bad. You're thinking about the thing that's making you feel bad, but you have no ability to resolve the problem. And so I think there's really just like two major categories of how we try to deal with our problems in life. One of them is to think our way through and think of an appropriate response or action in the world that solves that problem, and that gets us pretty far, right? We've done some amazing things as a species, even if you do realize that we have our faults. And there's other situations where we like almost literally drive ourselves crazy, applying that same process to problems that we have no ability to solve. So things in the past, things that are really big, things where we just we're ignorant about like even how to get started. And in those situations, learning to be okay with the fact that things aren't turning out the way we expected them to be or thought that they ought to be, which could turn into resignation, but can also turn, if done skillfully, into acceptance, is the only way through, right? Like the only way I can stop feeling like I'm unlovable because something was missing 40 years ago is to accept that like that happened and it really doesn't have any bearing on who I am today, right? Or even if it does have bearing on who I am today, and that doesn't define whether I'm lovable or not, right?